I'm Steve Edwards, the Executive Director of the IOP, and we are thrilled to have you with us tonight for a very timely and thoughtful conversation about global affairs, about what the next president will be facing in the foreign policy inbox, the challenges on a range of issues, as well as Ambassador Sherman's direct experiences with the Iranian nuclear negotiations. This event is part of our ongoing series of conversations, as many of you know, that attempt to bring key thought leaders here to the university to engage in key issues of the day. We invite you to sign up, if you haven't already, for our newsletter, which brings you information about upcoming events in our series. You can go to our website at politics.uchicago.edu to sign up for that, which comes out every Monday. We have a lot coming up in the next 2 weeks. There are 2 events just to put on your radar screens that have been newly added that are a bit different from our usual fare. One is coming up next Wednesday at the IOP. It's a conversation with Matt Terrell, who is one of the foremost researchers and dean of the Institute for Molecular Engineering here at the University of Chicago, looking really at the intersection of science and politics around what gets funded and how the regulatory environment affects, in some cases, what gets pursued and also what gets adopted and adapted by society as a whole. So we'll explore those questions. And then the following week, on Thursday the 20th, we're welcoming a trio of some of the most highly acclaimed young mayors in the country to share their experiences tackling some of the big problems facing cities today on everything from education to opioid addiction, business development, and the like. That'll be on Thursday the 20th. So all that you can find out more about on politics.uchicago.edu. As is customary here, we will pause a bit later, take your questions. We ask that you, when we do, that you keep your questions short and to the point and make them questions so that we can get to as many of you as possible. And we look forward to hearing what you have to say in the conversation as well. So without further ado, I will turn the microphone over to Caroline Hutton, who is a 3rd year in the college. She's a public policy major, hails from West Dundee, Illinois. She is heavily involved in the IOP and is co-chair of our Women in Public Service Leadership Program, a program that Neve has kindly agreed to speak to in years past. It's a program that provides leadership and career development opportunities to young women here on campus. She's also active in Model UN. Please join me in welcoming Caroline Hutton to get us kicked off. Caroline.
Thank you, Steve. It's an honor and a privilege to welcome Ambassador Wendy Sherman to Chicago and to the Institute of Politics. Ambassador Sherman's career in the State Department began in 1993 when she served as Assistant Secretary of State for Legislative Affairs under the Clinton administration. She later advised Madeleine Albright as the counselor for the U.S. Department of State, and from 2011 to 2015, Ambassador Sherman served as the Undersecretary of State for Political Affairs, one of the highest positions in the State Department and the first woman to fill the role. In her time there, she served as the United States lead negotiator on the Iran nuclear deal and received the National Security Medal from President Obama for her efforts. Ambassador Sherman brings with her over 25 years of foreign policy experience, as well as a rich history in politics, social work, and community organizing. Her lifelong commitment to public service and extensive knowledge of international affairs will prove especially helpful as we move into tonight's topic of discussion. With the election just a month away, the United States stands at a momentous crossroads, not just for our own country, but for the entire global political system. Whoever is elected to our nation's highest office will face an unprecedented set of challenges, from China's rise to the threat of ISIS and nuclear power. For many Americans, our nation's security and place in the world order remains precarious, uncertain, and sometimes just plain scary. We're very lucky to have Ambassador Sherman here today to shed some light on the specific foreign policy issues facing our nation's next president and how we should proceed in the months following the election. Leading tonight's discussion is Neve King. Neve is the Vice President of Programs and Strategic Content at the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. She is also a member of the Women's Board at UChicago and of the Chicago Project on Security and Terrorism. So please join me in welcoming Ambassador Wendy Sherman and Ms. Neve King.
Thanks, Caroline. Oh, am I on? Oh, I've fallen down. Thanks, Caroline, and thanks, Steve and Alicia and Mallory. You guys don't know how lucky you are to have IOP. I hope you do know how lucky you are, because it's wonderful. I'm really honored to be here tonight with Wendy Sherman. It's such a pleasure. Looking forward to discussing your background and what's going on in today's world. I think we'll dive right in. Populism, Steve mentioned, we're doing a conference on populism at the Council. There's a lot of anti-trade rhetoric going on right now, a lot of anti-globalization. We're thinking about the morality of globalization, how it creates inequality and equality. What do you think about anti-globalization and what's going on in America? And if you'd like to talk about it broader, for example, Brexit this summer, happy to hear on that too.
Sure. Thank you. It's great to be here with you all, and I second everything you said about the leadership of the IOP. And Carolyn, you're working so hard on women in public service, which I'm all for. So thank you very much for what you do, and great to be here with you, Niamh, and all that the Council does.
Thank you.
You know, in 2002, I was in the private sector, and I was a consultant to the Pew Global Attitudes Project, and actually, my husband, Bruce Stokes, still works on the Pew Global Attitudes Project, an economic project. And in 2002, they did the first survey around the world of 44 countries. People liked what they got from globalization. Better drug choices, better food choices, our blue jeans. My favorite statistic was the Vietnamese thought that cell phones were the greatest thing on the face of the earth, but only 10% of them had them. So people really liked what they saw coming. But internal in that poll was also some data that said that people, particularly in emerging markets, were afraid of modernity. They were afraid that they were going to lose who they were, what their identity was, what their way of life was. And indeed, I think what happened in the developing world has come to the developed world. That although globalization is a reality, trade is certainly a reality, Americans are asking two basic questions. Who can keep me safe? And who can make sure I have a decent job so I can raise my family and my kids can have a better life than I can? And the answers to those two questions are a little tough at the moment. And the reason they're tough is because globalization and trade creates a lot of winners, but it also creates some losers. And so, with all due respect to the 55-year-old white guys in the audience, if you're 55 years old and you had a manufacturing job where you were earning $25 an hour, and that manufacturing is now being done in China or Vietnam, and you're told, well, just go take a software coding course, and in 2 years you can earn $15 an hour, and you've got to put your two kids through college, and the interest rates on college loans are out of sight, well, you're not very happy with trade or with globalization or with institutions. And we have had a trade adjustment assistance program, but it's pretty pathetic. And so I think you're going to see whoever becomes president of the United States, and as you might imagine, I have my favorite, you're going to see her put her focus on raising the minimum wage, having a real trade adjustment program, making sure that people can go to college if you earn under a certain income for free, make sure that people can refinance their loans, have an infrastructure fund where we create new jobs, look at corporations who take assets abroad and don't bring them back to the United States in any way, shape, or form. So I think we will deal with the multilateral trade agreements again, eventually. But I think we have done a really lousy job, quite frankly, of addressing the needs of those folks who feel like they've been left behind and left out. And we have to do that. Now, Brexit, I think, was a more complicated agenda than that. Few things on Brexit. One, referendums are anti-democratic. They are really not good means of figuring out what people think or what people want. But nonetheless, they get used again and again, as they were just used for the FARC peace deal in Colombia, which, much to the shock of every pollster, did not succeed. In Brexit, yes, it was anti-globalization, but it was also, as you know well, the free movement of people. And when the European Union was created, one of the important things was that people could move freely. The veritable Polish plumber could go plumb in France and move his family or her family there if they wanted to. And instead, what people were seeing, because of what's happening in the Middle East, largely in Syria, but in Afghanistan and Iraq as well, floods of migrants, some of us would call them refugees, but migrants coming into Europe without an infrastructure or a way to deal that was a common agreement among the European Union, and it scared the dickens out of people. And we know in America, although we do integration and assimilation better than most countries, we know that the last group that came doesn't particularly want to see the next group come. Because they just got their jobs, they just got their foot in the door, they just established themselves in the community, and they're afraid that the next group is going to challenge what they finally have gotten a grasp of. So we have a lot of work to do.
Indeed. I did not know Bruce Stokes was your husband.
Yes.
I just saw him last week on a panel. He's I recommend him as well on a trade panel. So that's part of your expertise.
36 years, yes.
Excellent. That's very exciting to hear.
It is. I see him occasionally too.
Oh, yeah. All the time he's spent in Vienna, I'm sure that it's hard. I just wanted to tag on one thing on what you said there on Brexit, because you're talking about the election. I think it was Tony Blair put it well, like people woke up on the 24th of June and were like, oh, I cast a protest vote and now I'm going to have to deal with this for a pretty long time. A very complicated situation, particularly for all of Europe, particularly for Ireland, where I come from. This brings up history that we thought we had kind of started to bury 20 years ago. I'm wondering if you are concerned at all that on the 9th of November, people who were negligent, not wanting to go out to the vote or thinking that they didn't really like Hillary, are they going to have the same kind of sense of remorse, you think, that we're seeing in some people in the UK?
I'm sure there always is, after our elections, some remorse, people who don't vote that wish they had. And obviously, I would encourage everybody here, whoever you are for, to get out and vote and get everybody you know to get out and vote, because that's what democracy ought to be about. So I think that's absolutely crucial to the value of our democracy. But I'm sure there will be some remorse. You know, we do strange things politically. The United States Congress just passed a bill so that 9/11 victims could sue Saudi Arabia, which is really against all of the norms of the international community that sovereign nations should stay immune. And it was very tough, and if I had been in the Senate, I might have voted for it too, because how do you vote against 9/11 families after all they've been through? Just as a political matter, as a gut-wrenching matter. But as soon as they did that vote, no hearings, no floor debate, no discussion, just the vote. I wish they'd do that on a few other things. They now are having buyer's remorse because there are real consequences and they're going to try to fix it. So, you know, sometimes we go with our gut and then we got to clean up after ourselves.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So let's move a little further east from Russia to Moscow. Russia. What's going on there? It seems like it's getting more and more complicated. We're seeing funny stories about romances between certain presidential candidates and certain leaders that have been in power for a long time. What's the way forward, do you think, with the US and Russia?
I think complicated. We will work with Russia where we can, as we did on Iran, as we did on the Syria CW chemical weapons deal, as we did on New START, which now is having some new challenges after recent announcements by the Russians. But we will challenge and confront Russia where we must. And it will be difficult. I was very, I guess fortunate's the right word, to be with Secretary Kerry when we spent 4 hours with Mr. Putin in Sochi. He is a very smart man. He's can be very charming. He clearly wants the dignity of being a powerful country. He is a member of the permanent members of the Security Council. These are the 5 original members of the Nuclear Club. That's why they're the 5 permanent members of the Security Council. And he doesn't necessarily play by the rules that the rest of us play by. I think the thing that I am most immediately concerned by, beyond the obvious, which is the horrific situation in Syria, the ongoing strangulation in Ukraine, and the complexity of Russia looking abroad to reclaim an empire, is what I believe Russia is doing to try to influence our elections. It's not impossible for hackers to get into voting booths, but it's hard, and we have a very decentralized election system, and most of our ballot boxes have paper backups. So it's not to say they can't mess with it, they can, but it's hard. What they are doing that is much more concerning is what they've already done in Europe, which is to hack documents, as they did with Secretary Colin Powell, and Secretary Powell said these are authentic documents. Then the next rash of documents will look authentic, but they won't be. And the press in our 24/7 media world will just report it as fact. We seem to be doing a lot of that these days, just reporting whatever comes out of someone's mouth as fact, when in fact the press really needs to very carefully look at these documents, make sure they're authenticated, because there is an influence campaign going on.
Yes, that's right. Concerning. So you don't mess around with easy places in the world. You do Iran. You did North Korea during first President Clinton, or the President Clinton thus far. What do you think? What do you think we should do on North Korea? What are your views on where we are with them right now?
Well, we're in a very difficult place. They have now conducted 5 nuclear tests. They've shown us that they are building more and more sophisticated missile technology, which in the not too distant future will probably include an intercontinental ballistic missile capable of carrying a nuclear weapon to the continental United States. At that point, North Korea will believe they have deterred the United States from any action, and therefore deterred the world, because we are the largest and most consequential military in the world. I think that we can't let this stand. This will absolutely be high on the inbox of the incoming president. It's no mystery to anybody that China is a key player in this scenario. China is very concerned that if North Korea collapses, or there is a coup, or something untoward happens, what will the Korean Peninsula look like? Will there be missile defense that then is against China? Will there be American troops in a reunified Korea? Who will cover the economic costs? So I believe that all of these questions need very careful conversation with the Republic of Korea, with Japan, and with China, so that we can construct together a scenario where we know what the future will look like, and will make it more likely that China will take the actions that it must in order to say to North Korea, this is not legitimate. This will be very difficult, very, very difficult.
Boy, there are no easy answers out there for any of this.
No.
Not domestically. Why don't we talk about climate change also?
Sure.
No easy answers. Can you tell us a little bit, we're moving on to COP22 now, December. Tell us a little bit about how you see the way forward for climate change, what kind of commitment we need from our allies. I think there was some good news on climate change recently.
Yeah, look, I think this is some good news in the sense that, and this is a place where we worked with China to get voluntary commitments that no one ever thought could be gotten. And we now have a way forward, and the President and President Xi just reaffirmed what they're going to do and how they're going to proceed forward. This is staggeringly consequential, and immediately so. Probably most of the violence and conflict that will come in the years ahead will be because of drought and lack of water, or too much water. Not just oil anymore, but really natural resources that are part of people's daily lives. Very poor communities already are having to adapt or to try to mitigate some of the impact of climate change. This is something that young people and the infamous millennials care about deeply, so I'm very glad to see Vice President Gore on the campaign trail now talking about the importance of climate change, because we all have to give him credit. He talked about this inconvenient truth long before most people did.
Yes, and he speaks about it just wonderfully. If anyone hasn't heard him on it, I recommend you check it out, because he knows how to take really complicated things and make them simple and clear. Yeah. So I had a breakfast this morning with a gentleman visiting from Hong Kong who runs this organization called the China United States Exchange Foundation. And he's told me, he said, oh, we have this joke in Hong Kong where we say in the American election when it's on, it's really not fair that only the Americans get to vote, because it's so consequential, we should all get to vote. And I kind of didn't think it was very funny, but I mean, it's funny, and the point behind it is funny, but it's kind of true. So they're sitting there in Hong Kong and all over the world. I mean, you travel all the time. If you go anywhere, they're like, what's going on in America? So
You said that very nicely. Most people say, what the hell are you all thinking?
yes. I try to refrain from profanities on mic, but the rest of the time, they're very good. They're good.
Are you thinking?
Yes, they're good adjective. They're good to add. So what are allies making of all of this and what's going on at the moment? Because from my vantage point, they're coming. We had more visitors from all over the world at the council coming from, whether they were visiting for UNGA or IMF meetings, just they want to hear from us. They don't want to talk to us. They're like, what's going on?
I think, unfortunately, our election has already had consequence.
Yeah.
People are very concerned about whether they can rely on us, whether alliances are meaningful. I'm going to go to Seoul on Saturday. I'll be there Monday and Tuesday. And I know that the South Koreans want to make sure that, our alliance is, as we say, rock solid. And it will be, because it must be. I want to make sure that people understand all of the discussion about NATO and how the member states of NATO ought to pay more money, and of course they should. And some have, and some are, and more will. But the famous Article 5 of NATO, which says an attack on one is an attack on all, has only been invoked once. Only once. And the one time it was invoked was for the United States after 9/11 so that NATO troops would go to Afghanistan. So the irony of all of this debate about, does NATO mean anything? It meant the most to us and to our security. And it is one of the most consequential alliances the world has ever seen.
Indeed, indeed it is. So the big feather in your cap for the last big job you had.
So to speak.
Yes, Iran. I mean, that was definitely not easy, complicated in so many ways, from Israel's involvement domestically and just how the world viewed it all. And it's complicated. This is nuclear fusion, and I'm sure lots of words that people didn't understand when they were trying to figure out how they felt about it. Why don't you tell us your view on how things are going since the deal was done, what you see the future of kind of the deal being, and your hopes for what this means for peace and security in the region?
Thank you. Sure. I'm very proud to have been part of that, working with the president, with Secretary Kerry, Secretary Moniz, and an extraordinary team of Americans whose names you will never know, but are the most professional, most extraordinary experts who really were the guts of getting this work done, because it was highly technical. And I had a team of 15 that were core, but we were backed up by literally hundreds of Americans. All of our nuclear labs would authenticate what we did. And so we had our team and our backup, but so did every member of the P5+1, that's the 5 members of the Security Council, permanent members of the Security Council, plus Germany and the European Union. So we were a large group that had to consult ITs and say, we consulted inside the administration, we consulted with the United States Congress, we consulted with our allies and partners, including Israel, Gulf states. We consulted with each member of the P5+1 and the European Union and them collectively as well, and occasionally we consulted with Iran.
Yeah.
So, because it was a constant negotiation at all of those levels. Look, the Iran nuclear deal, known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, was the best solution among really bad choices. Some people believed we should have bombed Iran, and we could have. And we could have bombed away their facilities. The only trouble with that is they could reconstitute them within 2 or 3 years, and then they would most likely reconstitute them underground and in secret. And we just have to come back and bomb them again. Some people said, well, the sanctions are working, just, sanction them more. But in fact, the sanctions never stopped Iran's nuclear program. The point of the sanctions was not to stop their program, because it didn't. They went from 164 centrifuges to 19,000 at the point that we had the most extensive sanctions in the world ever placed on a country. The sanctions were meant to drive them to the negotiating table, to drive them to make a choice, which is what it did. And the deal was to cut off all the pathways to what's called fissile material for a nuclear weapon. That's the matter, highly enriched uranium or weapons-grade plutonium, that's needed to make a nuclear weapon. And the deal, which was negotiated in earnest for 2 years, actually for many more years than that, but in earnest for 2 years, has done that in a verifiable way. There's no issue of trust here. I don't trust Iran. They don't trust me. It is about verification and monitoring, and Iran has complied with the deal. And we agreed, and the rest of the international community agreed, this is not just a deal between the United States and Iran. This is a deal between the P5+1, the European Union, and Iran, and endorsed and cemented by a 15-0 vote on the UN Security Council. So it's an international deal. So far it's working. And the reason it was so important is Iran does really bad things around the world. They are the largest state sponsor of terrorism. They ship arms around the world. They have a horrific human rights record. But imagine if Iran had a nuclear weapon. Their ability to project power into the Middle East to deter us and our allies and partners from action would be profound. So we had to get the nuclear weapon off the table. Now we are focusing, as we always have, but with even greater intensity, in dealing with all of the other things that Iran is doing, none of which are very good.
Trust but verify.
Or as Secretary Clinton has said, distrust but verify.
Okay, a new twist on that one. So maybe you'll just give us a couple of minutes on your view on the path forward with Syria.
There was nothing I did in government that was as heartbreaking as the conversations around Syria. I was lucky enough to be with Secretary Kerry to work the Syria CW agreement, and we all felt really great about that because no one had been able to figure out how were we going to get the chemical weapons out of Syria, and we did that. But it was very short-lived, not because the chemical weapons didn't get out, but because Assad turned to chlorine and barrel bombs and starvation as a weapon of war, and because Assad focused on the opposition and on civilians, he created a vacuum and a safe haven for Daesh, for ISIL, or ISIS, whatever you want to call them. And that had grown in part because of challenges in Iraq, but spilled over into Syria and became a horrific problem. The humanitarian disaster that is Syria is just beyond description.
It is.
It is just beyond description. And every time I have 2 little grandsons. So every time I see a little boy on a beach dead, or a little boy who's been pulled out of the earth from a bombing, I cannot imagine. I cannot imagine. So I think that the president looked at all of his options. He understood the American people did not want to send massive troops into the Middle East. He did train and equip the opposition, but in a limited fashion because he was concerned about a slippery slope. There were some in the administration, and I've said this publicly, I would include myself, that wished we had done more. But I do understand why the president made the choices he made, because the risks of other actions had downsides, and it was very hard for any of us to tell the president with confidence, if we did this, this, and this, what would happen? What would be the next 5 things that would occur? And you have to think ahead. You just can't act and not think ahead. Russia obviously has, and Iran, have taken this opening to try to solidify Assad's power. We, with our coalition partners, 61 coalition partners, have worked hard to try to deal with the terrorism, which has many consequences, the migrants into Europe, the humanitarian situation, the chances that we will destabilize countries like Lebanon and Jordan and Turkey that have taken in so many millions of refugees. It is really a truly horrific, lousy, impossible, difficult situation, and it will be very high in the inbox.
It will be very high in the inbox.
Very
yeah.
high in the inbox.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, there are no simple answers, nor have there been for 5 years. I think at the beginning what we noticed in our audiences was there were strange bedfellows of people who just wanted to go in immediately and bomb that you would normally never put politically together. And then other people who had a view like yours. We really don't know the ramifications of this particular
So here's
action.
the problem with bombing, which, you know, your gut tells you, go do that, right? What is the international legal basis to do that? We could go after terrorists because Iraq, a sovereign country, asked us to help protect their border. So the international legal basis for doing what we've done so far is because Iraq asked us to help secure their border. But what is the international legal basis for us trying to take Assad out? And that is a very tough dilemma. Some people believe there is a legal basis in what's called right to protect, which did pass at the United Nations, which says when there's a humanitarian disaster and a leader has undermined credibility with his or her own people, you have a right to protect. But it is not a altogether accepted legal premise for action.
Yeah.
So it's tough, and we do believe in laws.
And so we're going to go out to the audience in just 2 seconds. Any quick comments on Turkey or Pakistan? Because usually we talk to people, just quick ones. I say to people, like, what keeps you up at night? I know you travel a lot, you've got grandkids, that keeps you up at night, but Pakistan comes up a lot as on what keeps people up at night.
Well, you know, we have relations with Pakistan. We have relations with the intelligence community in Pakistan. We certainly worry about the nuclear weapons that are in Pakistan. And where Afghanistan's future is concerned, and remember, we still have thousands of troops in Afghanistan. Another thing that will be in the inbox, what are we doing in Afghanistan? How long should we be there? What should the troop level be? Pakistan is a critical player in that scenario, so a lot of thought will have to be given to where we head in that direction. And we've seen lately, of course, increased tension between India and Pakistan because of Kashmir. And I would expect that to continue from time to time. Turkey's an extraordinary country. Extraordinary people with a leader who really loves power.
Have you been to his Golden Palace?
I have not been to his Golden Palace. I've seen photographs of his Golden Palace. I have met with him on more than one occasion, but not at the Golden Palace. Turkey is needed by Europe, needed by NATO. After the United States, Turkey is the largest military in NATO. And yet at the same time, I doubt, you tell me, you're Irish, is the European Union going to keep its visa deal with Turkey? I doubt it. And then what happens? Does Turkey blink, or does Turkey send all of those refugees out of the country?
Yeah. That was quite a tour of our complicated times of the world,
And
right?
we didn't even talk about cyber.
We didn't get any visas in our passport. Oh, yes. Well, I'll wait and see if one of the audience, you want to hear about cyber? Okay. I was at an event recently that Ambassador Sherman was at, and she brought up blockchain, and I was dreadfully embarrassed because I had never even heard the two words put together before in the same sentence. So maybe you can.
Blockchain is a different. Blockchain is, and I don't understand all the technology. Someone out here probably does, but I don't.
Well, you know about enriched uranium and weapons-grade
Yes,
plutonium,
I do.
so you get a gold star for that.
So, blockchain is sort of the next avenue that gave us Bitcoin. And blockchain is a technology, if it gets adopted, allows for peer-to-peer contact in a secure environment. And if it works the way people expect it will work, it will overtake what we know as the internet, as the technology, and it will be able to do some good things. It will be able to secure voting lists. It will be able to secure identity. Who are you? It will be able to create peer-to-peer discussions that may change how democracies grow. It also can be used by bad guys, too. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done, but I think between blockchain technology or whatever the next iteration of it is, and artificial intelligence, which is certainly coming our way, and driverless cars, my grandkids will grow up in a world that I can't even imagine. I think back to when Al Gore, speaking of the vice president, talked to all of us about a superhighway, and we all said, what is he talking about? And now, who could imagine the world other than it is?
Yeah, he was talking about 3D printing about 6 years ago in a way
Exactly.
that I was like, what is he? He's like, and you print this thing, and then what you don't have is what it isn't. I'm like, oh, okay, hard to wrap your head around that one.
So, you know, I think that what's going to happen is going to happen with such fastness
Yep,
that policy will have a hard time keeping up.
yep.
And cyber security, internet freedom is another place where policy has had a tough time keeping up with the changes that occur, but it is staggeringly consequential, as we are seeing.
It is great. Let's hear from the audience. Raise your arms if you don't mind. Yes, please, right there by the man with mic. Thank you.
So Muammar Gaddafi gave up his nuclear program, and his regime ended with, in large part due to the influence of the US and then Secretary of State Clinton. So I guess this is sort of two parts. Did you see that this sort of, like, it ended in hostility from the US, that this almost lack of credibility on the part of the US expanded to the Iran deal in terms of nuclear negotiations between the United States and other Middle Eastern powers? And additionally, what is the next step for the United States in Libya, which is now engaged in a somewhat less discussed civil war? And how would President Clinton, after having played a large role in overthrowing Gaddafi, go about in restoring security to that region?
Well, first of all, let's go back to history a little bit. The United States did not have any ground troops in Libya. The United States provided air support and logistics because we were asked in by the Libyan opposition, which were a fully formed group of people who really wanted more control of their country. So we were invited in by the people of Libya, and actually we were invited in by Europe to help in a humanitarian cause. That's what we did. I think people have this image of what happened in Libya that is not actually what the facts are. What happened to Gaddafi, I think, came as somewhat as a surprise to everyone. And in addition, the nuclear program that Gaddafi had was nowhere close to what Iran has and had, and certainly nowhere close to what North Korea has. So it was a very early stage program. So in some ways, he didn't have to give up very much, to be perfectly frank about it. I think what happened in Libya, and Secretary Clinton has talked about this, President Obama has talked about this, European leaders have talked about this, is that I think people did not fully absorb that a country that had spent 40 years under a ruler that built no institutions had no institutions. And so the governance was quite a challenge. And the opposition could not put itself together in a way to take on that challenge fast enough while intra-tribal conflict took place inside of Libya. I would say there's a better chance for a political resolution today than there was 6 months ago. And I think people understand what is necessary to move forward, and the Libyan people do. So I'm slightly more hopeful, but it is a challenging situation yet.
Okay, why don't we try right here, please, in the plaid shirt.
You talked a little bit about Afghanistan, and I was wondering if we could go back to that a little bit in more depth in terms of the next president going forward. How do you balance the desire of a lot of the American people to see us pull out of Afghanistan with the need to see institutions of government that can stand on their own independently?
Well, I think there will probably be a review of where we are and a lot of fact-finding and understanding. What are our objectives there? What are our interests there? Therefore, what does that entail for us to do in terms of our troops there, in terms of the government, whether peace with the Taliban is ever possible, what role Pakistan's going to play and how we're going to navigate that, what people are trying to do to help with the economic development of Afghanistan. So there are a lot of questions, and usually when there's a brand new president, whatever party, there are several key issues around which they do a policy review. Some of that happens during the transition between Election Day and the inauguration. Some of that takes longer depending upon the subject, and I'm sure there will be a review of where we are with Afghanistan.
Okay, next up. Why don't we go right here with the glasses, please? Thank you. Oh, you both have, I'm sorry. You can both go. You can go after.
So we touched Pakistan in the last round, and I was just curious about the recent. Should I
Can
be
you
more
speak up a
loud?
little bit? The mic
Okay.
is not great.
So we touched Pakistan in the last bit, and I was just curious about the recent surgical attacks that India made in Pakistan. What do you think that the situation would be between the two countries, and what do you think would be the role of the U.S. or how U.S. sees it?
Well, as you probably know, India and Pakistan don't believe the United States should be anywhere near the discussion of Kashmir. They believe that is a discussion to be held between the two countries and not with the U.S. intervening. We've offered in the past. You know, this has been long a touch point. And when President Obama became president, I led the transition at the State Department, did the work to just get it ready for Secretary Clinton to come in. And during that transition, we had the terrorist attack in Mumbai, and it changed everything. How we thought about this, what we were going to do, what the relationship was with Pakistan and India. And it's a good example of, you know, if you'd asked me 6 months ago, would we have to think about our relationship with the Philippines? I probably would have said, nah, you know, we have a mutual defense treaty, we are going to work very well together, and look where we are today. So one never knows. That's the humility with which one has to approach all of this.
And next door glasses as well, please.
So regarding the climate change, so all the commitments...
Sorry, can you guys talk into the mic? We can't hear it up here, sorry.
So regarding the climate change, all the commitments made are voluntary. Like we heard in the presidential debate, the two views are so contradictory. Clinton is saying that, okay, we will pursue it, and whereas Trump is saying, no, we don't need to. So like, whom do we believe? Because most of the people do not even believe that climate change is actually a real issue.
I agree with you. Climate change is a real issue, and so I would hope that people think about that when they go into the voting booth.
Okay, right up here in the front row, please.
I'm from China, the city Shenzhen, right next to Hong Kong. And that, as I had noticed at the beginning of your speech, you mentioned China more often than the name of any other countries. And I'm very curious that can you anticipate that what will change about the foreign policies of the new president of the United States when Mr. Trump or Mrs. Clinton come into office?
Well, look, there's no question that China is a very powerful force in the world. It has been the fastest, well, one of the fastest growing economies, and certainly a large economy. Actually, there are more fast-growing economies in Africa than any other continental in the world, though the base is much smaller than China's base. China is very consequential, not only because they are nuclear power, but because they are such a large economy, because our economy depends on China, China's economy depends on us. If people didn't learn anything else from 2008, they should have learned there is no such thing as decoupling. We are all interdependent on each other. So we want China to do well, and we want China to succeed as long as China plays by the rules and that the playing field is fair. There will be things we will do working together with China. Climate change is a good example. The Iran deal is a good example. I hope we work very closely with China on North Korea because it will not be solved without China. But there are places where we will challenge and confront. The South China Sea is one of them. I think we have to be very mindful of what is occurring. And I hope we do not get into a confrontation over this because it would be very concerning.
Okay, next. Yes, please, right there.
Hello. This is actually a part of the world where you didn't mention very much. I'm from Monterrey, Mexico, and I'm concerned about current talks about going on, primarily on a debate stage, about NAFTA, what is the role of NAFTA in the future, and what is the role of Latin America, Mexico, and Latin America as a whole in the future of American foreign policy?
In my own view, Mexico is very important. It is, I think not only of the United States, but of North America, Canada, the United States, and Mexico. We are a continent, and we are trading partners with each other. Canada is our largest trading partner. Mexico is a growing trading partner. We have much, much in common. That's not to say there aren't challenges, but when we work together, we do much, much better. I think that all trade agreements will be looked at in some way or other. Life changes, situations change. If we can improve things for people, we ought to. Roberta Jacobson is our ambassador to Mexico. She was the Assistant Secretary for Latin American Affairs, Western Hemisphere Affairs, when I was what's known as P, the Undersecretary for Political Affairs, and she's just fantastic. And President Obama asked her to go there because we need someone who is strong, who understands the importance of our relationship with Mexico. And when we work together, we work out the problems that exist, which exist for Mexico and exist for us, and I believe we can work through this.
Okay, why don't we go up the front here, please?
Thank you. I want to take you back to when you were doing the negotiations with Iran and with everybody.
I have to?
Please, please, because I'm curious. Was there a moment when you thought this is really going to work, and what was that moment like?
I would say there were many more moments where I thought this is not going to happen than moments I thought it was going to happen. This was a very complicated deal. Very, very complicated. Highly technical, very complicated. Every word mattered. Every word. So many, many times, and one of the things I have learned in life, which I think probably you have as well, and all these young people will if they haven't already, is you can help shape things, but you can't control most things in life. And one has to approach a negotiation, as we did with the President of the United States, saying this is your objective, to close down all the pathways to fissile material for a nuclear weapon, highly enriched uranium, weapons-grade plutonium, covert, in a verifiable way for a long period of time. And if you can meet that objective, great. And if you can't, that was the President's instructions. And so there were many moments when we were close, and then there was an obstacle, and I thought we would never get there. There was a point after Lausanne when we had the parameters of the final agreement, and we all, I think, surprised the press because the detail of that parameters was much more than anybody expected. And we were feeling great that now all we had to do was go back to Vienna and we'd get this done in short order. Well, soon after that, the Supreme Leader of Iran gave a speech with new parameters. And I think he was trying to manage politics inside his country. People tend to think of Iran as not having politics. They have very serious politics. And, we had a very tough meeting in Geneva with the Iranians. We said, what is this? And I think they were having a tough time, too. I think the last round, I was in Vienna for 27 days straight. Had one meal outside the Hotel Coburg. The Secretary of State was there for 2.5 weeks, the longest a Secretary of State has ever been outside the country in one place. He did have a broken femur, which made it hard to get around, but nonetheless, he needed to be there so that he was available when needed at the highest level. And we got close, and all of the ministers started to show up. And of course, when ministers show up, it puts pressure on the negotiators to get it done already, and they didn't know why we hadn't gotten it done yet. But we had our instructions, and you can't say yes when you haven't gotten to the goal line. The day before we kept extending the deadline because we saw there was a possibility. If we didn't think there was a real possibility, we would have just called it quits. We got to the day before we came to closure, and one of the last things to be negotiated was the UN Security Council resolution, because Russia and China did not want any restrictions left, and the rest of us certainly did. So we had all sort of agreed we'd leave it till last because it would put pressure on all of us to find a compromise. But we still had to meet the president's requirements. Rob Malley, who was from the National Security Council and sort of acted as my deputy, and I sat across from our counterparts, Abbas Arachi and Majid Ravanchi, and it was a very tough session. And someday I'll tell the whole story of what happened in that session, but when that evening was over, I knew we could get to the end.
I hope.
But I was exhausted. So we didn't get to celebrate once we came to an agreement, because we had to get past the congressional action. So even before we left Vienna, we were on the phone with members of Congress trying to tell them why they should not block this deal. So the celebration did not come until September 17th, which was the last day they could block the agreement. And Secretary Kerry had invited the team and the slightly broader team to the 8th floor of the State Department. And unbeknownst to both Secretary Kerry and myself, Secretary Kerry was in a meeting, I was in a meeting, the President of the United States showed up. So he walked into a room and neither the Secretary nor I was there. We quickly were told by aides, we might want to leave our meetings and go up to the 8th floor. And he was incredibly generous, walking around and talking to each person one-on-one and thanking them for what they did. But people were just exhausted.
No doubt. Okay. Why don't we try in the back there, please, in the middle?
Hi, I was just wondering, given that you had a lot of interaction with Iranians who work for the current administration in Iran, I'm just wondering what you think are the prospects of a more normal relationship with Iran. I mean, not tomorrow, but if you think the trajectory is pointing up, if you think that there's going to be some 20 years from now a Cuba-like moment where things, one day things are as they always were, and then the next day things have changed. And do you think that's even possible in Iran?
I tend to be an optimist by nature. Madeleine Albright, first woman Secretary of State, my colleague now in business, always says she's an optimist who worries a lot, which I think is a great description. I don't know. There is a very literate, well-educated middle class in Iran. They see how the rest of the world lives. But there is a very entrenched government led by clerics that's very conservative. I only say this half jokingly. I don't believe there are moderates in the way that we think of moderates. There are hardliners and there are hardliners. And, I hope the hardliners win out over the hardliners. We have an election coming up in 2017 for the presidency. I don't know how it will turn out. I don't know whether the Iranian people feel that there is enough return for the nuclear agreement for Rouhani to prevail. But even if Rouhani prevails, there is a very long way to go. So I just don't know. And we have to do all the work we must to secure our partners and allies from all of the other horrible things that Iran does. And there is no trust between us. The depth of mistrust between the United States and Iran is incredibly, incredibly deep.
I think you'd have to be an optimist to work on the things that you've worked on.
Yeah,
right?
That's true. That's
wonder what
true.
the balance is between optimists and pessimists in the State Department, so you can have success. Okay, I think right there, please, with the glasses in the middle.
Ms. Sherman, so last year you made a comment on the comfort woman in Carnegie Endowment Institute, and there was certain controversy at the time. So definitely Koreans and Chinese are having quarrel with Japanese over comfort women from World War II. So what's the right thing to do, or what's the appropriate thing to do for the United States to balance out American interests in defending its ally and the overwhelming evidence against its denial of historical facts?
Look, I think that President Park and Prime Minister Abe showed great courage, and I don't believe you can do anything in this world without courage. And they came to an agreement to try to take a step toward resolving the comfort women issue. Very difficult, very politically risky for both of them. But that's what it takes. It takes the willingness for leaders to take political risk because they see that it is critical for Japan and South Korea to be as one if they're going to deal with North Korea, if they're going to deal with the security threats in the region. They both have much stronger relationships with China than they've had in the past, but nonetheless, they share some anxieties about that as well. So I think the best the United States can do is to support the leaders themselves in the choices they make for their own people to try to go forward. When I was at Harvard, after I left government for the fall semester last year, I worked with a group of graduate students on a project on political forgiveness to understand when countries do that and when they don't. And we started that project believing that why couldn't Japan be more like Germany? But in fact, Germany is the outlier. Most countries are like Japan. What Germany did after World War II was quite extraordinary. Some of it was out of self-interest, concerned about a rising Soviet Union, so Germany and France reconciled over steel. But some of it was actions by Adenauer to do reparations, to try to move forward, to find common cause, to make remembrance part and parcel of German identity. And indeed, there was no apology from Germany till many, many, many years later. And when Willy Brandt, in I think it was 1976, kneeled at I think Auschwitz, he did not apologize. He was just kneeling for people to understand that he understood what Germany had done. And then it was some years later when the then, I think, Prime Minister was in Israel at the Knesset that there was a formal apology. So in my own view, what is most important is for countries to see if they can find a way forward, whether their interests today can help them on that path. And I really salute the President and the Prime Minister for trying to do so. And it is now remains with the people of those two countries and the leadership of those two countries to find the best way forward. But for me, this is just for me, remembrance is absolutely crucial for all things in life. So you don't repeat history.
That's a fitting and powerful note to end on as we think not only about those specific contexts of the question, but about our own context and our relations with others around the globe. I want to ask all of you to join me in thanking Ambassador Sherman for her comments tonight. Thank you very much.
That was so great. I loved meeting you.
And please join me in thanking Neve King as well, the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. Neve, always great to have you with us. Thank you for all you do as well. Thank you so much for being here. We wish you a pleasant good evening and hope to see you at our next event very soon.